All right. Thanks for hopping on, Vincent. I know we took a little while longer just to get set up, but
No
uh,
worries.
I wanted to give an intro. This is Vincent. We actually went to school together. Fun story. We didn't talk to each other at all, except for at parties. We would give each other like, what's up?
Yeah.
But outside of that, we didn't really talk much until real estate. Um, and I'm gonna let Vincent kind of talk about his background, but he's been a Sarah homie for a long time. He's very active and he's been extremely helpful. But his family and him, he does mostly. I believe you've done residential and commercial investing as well.
That's correct.
Yeah, and so they own in the Bay Area. So after a while, he did some supply chain and manufacturing automation. He eventually joined the family business full time post COVID 2020 to really focus on commercial retail development and property management. If you guys want to drink as well, he's performing quality testing at the family brewery, which a few of us visited a while back. So without further ado, I'm gonna let him take it over from here and just give your background and go through your slides.
All right. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So this is an intro to commercial retail and office real estate here. As a fair warning, I'm not an expert in mortgages and financing, so I'll be able to glance over that at a high level. I really want to go through this because I want people to be exposed more towards commercial retail and understanding the lingo, the terms, and all the fun stuff associated with it. As you'll notice probably throughout the slides, you'll probably notice that I will be there will be some overlap with multifamily in terms of concepts and whatnot. As well, I will try and keep this PG, and I will try to answer as many questions as possible. So that's a little about me here. So let's get started here. So we're going to start off with pros and cons of commercial real estate here, or commercial retail real estate here. Now, here's just a few pros and a few cons that we have here. The big ones in terms of pros is that a lot of your general day-to-day maintenance will be handled by the tenant rather than by the landlord. So for example, let's just say your tenant complains, we get complaints, saying, hey, our toilet is leaking, what do we do? And I tell them, I point to the lease, I say, fix it. It's something that the tenant fixes themselves. All right, and other things, there's also longer leases. So typically, I've seen residential, typically there may be 1 year, maybe 2 years, or maybe month to month. Your leases for commercial retail, typically I've seen 1 and 2 years, but typically I'll see 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and it'll go on and on because there will also be options as well to extend the lease. So that one you can see leases that will continue on, and I've seen leases that have gone on for maybe 50 plus years. All right, another one right here is the cap rate. So this is just part of like a risk versus reward here. You're going to see a bit of what we call higher cap rates here. The amount of cash that you're getting back for the amount of dollars you're putting in is going to be higher for your commercial retail. And finally, I would say that leases are landlord friendly, and I put a double asterisk there because typically they're very landlord friendly, but once in a while you will end up with having to negotiate with the tenants, and the tenants will have their own lawyers as well. So you do have to be careful, or else sometimes the tenant will actually screw over the landlord. And I've actually seen leases where people have literally been screwed out of millions. Landlords have been screwed out of millions just because of the way that the tenants' lawyers like phrase some leases. And the second part of that as well is, being in California, California kind of views residential, like, tenancy as kind of like as an absolute right, and for commercial, it doesn't really extend the same to commercial retail, so that you get some leeway a little bit in certain states such as California. Now, on the con side, we have other things. Some of the cons that you'll see is that there's generally a higher barrier of entry in terms of your costs. It's your leases, your tenant improvements, all these things are going to be more complex than your residential. And that will add up as well, right? You'll end up with more legal fees. You'll end up with more leasing fees associated with trying to acquire tenants. As well, just because it's not because everyone needs housing, but not everyone needs retail. So you're going to end up with longer vacancies at times, and sometimes you have to be able to stomach these for 1, 2, or 2 or more years. Sometimes, I mean, typically you'll see vacancies for months for these. So you need to have the war chest to be able to sit through these vacancies. And finally, just because it is a riskier asset class than, say, your residential, you're going to have less leverage available. Your LTV is going to be lower as well, and you're going to be experiencing higher interest rates. So also, as I'm going through the slides, feel free to interrupt and ask me questions, as long as it doesn't interrupt the flow too much. So without further ado, I'm going to go on to the next slide here.
I was going to say, yeah, Vincent's totally right. Even in Austin, I was looking at properties, retail properties. I sent Vincent actually the one. It was a foreclosed building, and they're selling it like at above what it's worth. But at the same time, I was looking at it. Average vacancy. I was doing some research. Average vacancy in Austin for retail is still 10 months long. So, that's it's short for most places, but 10 months is a long time to have a vacancy in a building for. So
yeah, for residential, that's almost like a death sentence. But for for commercial, you just have to be able to weather through this stuff. And that's exactly why I'm actually here as well. It's talking about the LTV ratios and higher interest rates than residential, because it's just simply a more risky asset class here. And I threw in a picture of a balloon here. You might be wondering, like, some people might be seeing, like, what's the balloon payment here? So for those in multifamily, you understand this already, but your amortization period for commercial will exceed your loan period. So what that means is that let's just say you have, I'm trying to figure out the best way to explain this, but pretty much how it works is that you have low monthly payments throughout the course of your 5, 7, or 10-year loan. But at the very end, your last payment will be the remaining balance of whatever you've borrowed. So that is what we call the balloon payment at the very end there. And it's the idea of this is that, it's very at the beginning, especially the very beginning, your commercial loans your commercial properties, if you're trying to bring it up, you're going to experience vacancies, you're going to be a little bit cash poor on that side. So the idea of this is that they want to shift more of the loan burden towards the end of towards the end of the mortgage.
I think the best way I can also step in for and help explain is, how everyone has like a 30-year mortgage, it's fixed, you finish paying in 30 years. Imagine if instead of, you pay like it's a 30-year loan, but then it's a balloon payment. So like, say if you have a 5-year balloon payment, in year 5, you have to pay off the rest of the loan. Even though the first 5 years you pay like it's a normal 30-year loan, you get that one last payment. You got to make sure you fork up the rest of the loan. Also,
thank you, Nelson. You are much better at explaining this than I am. So
can you explain LTV
as I said,
for us
financing
too?
And mortgage is not my specialty here.
No, can you explain LTV to us real quick as well? I know you glanced over that recently.
Yeah, loan to value ratio. So the idea is that for this one, you won't be able to borrow as much against the total value of the property. That's just the basic summary of it. So pretty much, in special cases for residential, you could theoretically, put 0% down, but for commercial, since it's inherently more risky, the bank will ask you to put more percent of it down, and you can't borrow as much against the property. So it's all risk versus reward and that's how the bank evaluates it as.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah.
Thank you. I know. I hopefully I can explain finances a little better next time. All right. So commercial leases. This is very important when it comes to commercial retail and office, industrial. Like there's a lot of overlap here. Whenever you purchase a property, it's actually really important to read through every lease. And I recommend hiring a lawyer, honestly, to just go through all the leases here, because a lease can make or break, can make or break a property and the purchases associated with it. So this is just kind of a high level of what you can look for in terms of commercial leases. So I put in there almost everything is negotiable here. So almost everything is negotiable. The only things that are not negotiable are whether things are legal or not legal. That's in terms of saying, if the city doesn't allow marijuana to be grown, then you can't do that. That's the only restriction you have. But besides that, everything else is negotiable, such as your lease duration and your option terms here. Now, your lease durations, I mentioned earlier, it'll be like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, but then as well, then the tenant may or may not have an option term. So this pretty much what happens in this is that the tenant will tell the landlord, they'll notify them anywhere between 90 days before to 30 days before, or some days prior to it and they say, hey, I wish to formally exercise my option and I would like to stay here for another 3 or 5 years or whatever it is, right? And it comes along with the rental increases. And all this is all spelled out in the lease at the very beginning. Now, option terms for a landlord, it's not good. Technically, it's not good for a landlord. It only helps the tenant. So just keep it as an FYI before you start throwing out, option terms as a free goodie bag. Now, this is the fun one right here. There's base rent, additional rent, and responsibility. So your base rent is pretty much what you pay on a monthly basis to your what you get paid on a monthly basis by your tenant. Your additional rent is all the fun stuff associated with what we associate with triple net. Your property taxes, your insurance. These are additional rents or common area maintenance. These are all additional expenses on top of your base rent, which is kind of hidden. It's kind of hidden. It's a little bit sneaky in a lease. But what it does is that it's part of how the tenant reimburses the landlord for taxes and for maintenance in the building as well. And finally, the responsibilities. There actually will be spelled out responsibilities. Not every tenant will take care of every little thing. So it just depends on how the lease is structured. So sometimes your responsibilities, the tenant could maintain the HVAC unit. You might, as a landlord, you might have to take over and monitor the HVAC unit. It really depends on what's in the lease. Now, as I said earlier, there's permitted uses and assignment restrictions. Now, it's permitted uses. It's kind of obvious. It'll say in the lease, it'll say something like, tenant is only allowed to use this as a retail store for shoes and nothing else. And it sounds obvious that, of course you're only going to sell shoes there, but you'd be surprised as to the number of things that tenants will try and pull in order to make money or make ends meet. So I'll give you an example, literally a neighboring building next to us, they started off with a shoe store, but then or a clothing store, they just didn't have enough money coming in. So they started doing other things as well, such as, they held a private club there. So you bought, shoes for, $200 and you just happen to get a lap dance and free alcohol as well. So, it's obviously that's not legal and the city shut them down for it, but it has to be clearly stated on the lease. And if they break it, that's grounds for termination.
I've heard of these before in the Bay Area, the coffee houses, right?
Yes, the coffee houses in San Jose. I have not experienced them personally. I've heard of them though.
Yes, you've heard of them.
Yes, I've heard of them. Thank you for clarifying. We want to clarify this is PG. Okay. Assignment restrictions. I think this is fairly similar to residential. You just tell the tenant that you can't assign your lease to someone else without the landlord's permission. And this is actually very important, and I'll explain why in a little bit, because sometimes you don't want a corporate tenant to be assigning it to, say, Joe Blow from the streets, because the credibility is just no longer there. All right, number 4 here, we've got tenant improvements and tenants. Yes. Before
you move too quick on that, Kim had actually asked, could you provide an example of option terms that you've seen in a lot of leases or that you've given?
All right, so the most basic ones I've seen is that they'll have a lease duration of an original term of 3 years, and then you'll see, and then with 3% increases a year, and then the option term will just be another, say, 3 years on top of that. It can be less, it could be more, but that's the most basics. But I've seen some where honestly the most egregious ones where I've seen is 25-year base. Original term of 25 years, and then on top of that they'll throw on option terms of 20 years on top of that. Those things exist, and so that's why you've got to be very careful, and I highly recommend you bring in a lawyer, especially when you deal with these larger tenants, or else you will be screwed. So that's the basic rundown for option terms. Now, as for tenant improvements and tenant allowances, so typically when you have a residential tenant moving in, it's they usually, you tell, if they try to install stuff, if they try to redo the roof, of course you'll tell them, of course they don't have to, you have to do it. But tenant improvement refers to anything that you're retrofitting within interior or exterior of the building. And this is very commonplace for your offices, your restaurants, your retail stores. They say, hey, I want to build like a full kitchen in here, and that's considered a tenant improvement. Now, obviously the tenant as well, there's also tenant allowances here, and tenant allowances is also part of the thing that's negotiated, where the tenant says, hey, I'm going to be putting in, $300,000 worth of kitchen improvements to your premises. Can you help me subsidize some part of that? And then what happens? Then the landlord will say, yeah, sure, I will do what we call a tenant allowance, and the landlord will actually grant money to the tenant to actually complete the build out as needed. And it's usually done on a per square footage basis or a net amount. Obviously, these commercial leases are super long. I'll give, for example, our leases, ours is custom. We have a lawyer drafted with our own boilerplate clauses. Ours runs about maybe 25 to 30 pages on average. I've seen some where they've go up to 50 pages or even 75 or 100 pages long. And, they spell out, the lawyers go through, they spell out every little thing in there. So there's a lot of stuff, and there's plenty of things that can be covered in this, but I don't really want to go through because simply put, I don't have time. So, are there any questions about the leases in general, or what can or can't be negotiated in these? All right. Oh man, this video is blocking my screen here, but that's okay. All right, so remember how I mentioned earlier about additional rent? So this is what I call like the types of leases and your property expenses here. So your types of leases, there are typically 3 types of leases that you see when it comes to commercial. You got your full service, which is where the landlord is financially responsible for all property expenses. That includes electricity, water. The landlord will pay for it, right? And the tenant just pays a base rent, and that's it. Now, next one's gross bona fide. This is probably going to be this is the most common type of lease that you'll see. And this says that the tenant is financially responsible for some property expenses. So this, as I said before, everything is negotiable here. So you're going to see a lot of, it's kind of like nitpicking, like they'll pay here, but they won't pay there. The most common you'll see is the tenant will pay for their own utilities. But then maybe not, they'll pay for insurance, property taxes, common area maintenance, and all these things. It's just some. And finally, we got over there on the right, that's triple net and ground leases. And that's where the tenant is financially responsible for all property expenses. And I think the adjective that you're seeing here that a lot of people do not understand is the word financially, is because people think that, hey, I can just cruise, I just buy the place, I rent it out, and I just cruise along. But that's really not true, especially for a lot of your smaller properties and whatnot. What you'll notice is that, yes, the tenant is financially responsible for it, but in the end, as a landlord, you have your preferred contractors, you have your preferred methods of doing things. And quite honestly, the tenant is not very good at hiring contractors to handle some of these maintenance issues, right? So you trust, as a landlord, you only trust yourself. So you're still going to have to physically do the work or hire out the work yourself. You're still going to have to deal with the paperwork. It's just that the tenant just pays for it. All right, and I've also noted ground lease there. I will talk a little bit about ground lease later on, but the premise of a ground lease is that you lease let's say like a plot of land to a tenant, and from there what the tenant will do is then they'll just do the ground up construction. And now there's pros and cons to that. Obviously, as a pro, you're not going to you don't have to deal with the construction itself, but on the con side, you can't depreciate, and as well you won't be able, and I think as well you'll get a lower rent price per square foot. Yes.
I also want to jump in actually. For the bigger properties, you don't actually have to do the work if you hire a property manager for a larger commercial triple net, and then you can actually bill back the property management fees to the tenant to be managed by this property manager you hired. So
that is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. And that is one of the things that you'll see here in your CAM there is is as well, we actually throw in an administration fee. That is a great example of what you're talking about. So I mean, but honestly, like I think the tenants get their worth out of the administration fees for me, because I'll go on, I'll talk about it a little bit here. So you'll see your common property expenses that you'll see. Your taxes, you're going to get your property taxes is probably your big one right here. Other things as well that can be reimbursed are your business taxes as well. Usually this is issued on a city to city basis. And then as well, you've got your insurance, you got your primary property insurance, and then as well, they can or cannot be liable for the umbrella as well. Now, CAM, which is common area maintenance, which I forgot to spell out there, you're going to see a lot of things. So like your building maintenance, if you need to repair your roof, that can be billed to the tenant. Garbage services, all the compost, all the garbage fees, which adds up quite a lot. You've got your house utilities as well. So for example, exterior lighting, sometimes that will go on the house meter, and in return, you can bill the tenant for that. Or say like your lighting or your water that's used, say, in the hallways of the office, right? That is also billable back towards the tenant if needed. Janitorial services and security, these are just some examples of CAM, and I actually will on the next page kind of go through an example of what we've done in the past.
Before you go too far ahead, questions from the Facebook chat. Someone asked, what is your general TI that you give for tenants?
Tenant
improvement is TI,
so I think
by
what
the way.
he's referring, I think the what you're referring to is the oh shoot, I forgot the term myself. I have to go back. Tenant allowances. See, this is how little I use it. So as a background, actually, I should have clarified earlier. We do a lot of the general contracting ourselves, so we actually do not allow our tenants to have tenant allowances. Like we will allow them to build out by themselves, but typically we like to do it ourselves. This is a general philosophy, because the only person who cares about the building truly is yourself, and typically tenants are very they hire contractors based off of one quality, and that's cheap. So they'll punch holes through the roof. They'll do things that, quite honestly, they don't know what they're doing, and it'll, in the end, it bites the landlord in the end, because all these maintenance things will keep popping up over and over again, because quite honestly, the contractor didn't do a good job. So to answer the earlier question is, I don't know. That was a very long-winded answer. I don't know. All right, so this next slide I'm going to show you is an example of what we do for our CAM breakdown here. So this is an actual tenant here. So this is in a business plaza in Oakland. So what you'll see here, you'll see three columns here. The first one on the left here is the lease square footage. So typically how CAM is broken down is on a pro rata basis here. So you can see that this tenant leases 961 square feet. It's about 5.22 square feet of all 5.22 square feet of all the leasable area within the plaza itself. Now this middle column, what you'll see here, you'll see a lot of the common things that we typically tack on for CAM here. So the top part is the CAM, right? You'll see your cost for water irrigation for the gardens or whatever, right? You've got your scavenger cost. That's all your compost, your garbage, your recycling. These things add up a lot. As well, then you've got your repairs and maintenance. These are things such as signage. It's things such as roof repairs. Breaking things down if needed. To just in general building repairs. Now as well, you'll see us here. PG&E common area. So this is the $2,400. This is the electricity charges that we use to light up the parking lot. And then finally, there's the parking lot maintenance. Now this is parking lot maintenance. It's a lot of, because quite honestly, it's a class, I guess people like to categorize as a class C. So pretty much what this means is that, there's going to be people throwing garbage around on the parking lot and doing graffiti. So we need to have someone that can actually maintain it and keep things in a tip-top shape. As well, this parking lot maintenance is also very important. I think for those that have dealt with any any commercial, they know how much of a pain garbage is, and the fact that you need to pack garbage in, so actually garbage packing is part of that parking lot maintenance. Now that's the CAM part. Then of course there's many more things that you can tack onto CAM, but that's just a quick rundown of what we do for this specific tenant. Now below this is we have insurance, we have the business taxes, and we have the property taxes, and so that whole thing is total up to, including the admin fee, which Nelson mentioned a second earlier. So you can see that we charge about 10% for our admin fee for this one. And so you can see that we'll take about 5% of the 131,000 there. So I can't seem to move, oops, sorry. I can't see the total due, but typically on the right column, what you'll see is the top is how much the CAM charges ended up being after all is said and done. And typically what most people do for CAM is that CAM is usually billed on a monthly basis, and then we reconcile it at the end. So let's just say, I can't see the numbers here because the screen's blocking me here, but so typically how it works is there's a certain amount that is actually calculated at the end of the year. This is the amount that the tenant has paid throughout the year. If there's a difference, then we charge them for that difference. If they overpaid, then we'll credit them. So that's a basic rundown of how CAM works for one specific tenant. So this right here you see this is what we call a triple net, where they are financially responsible for their pro rata share of insurance, taxes, and CAM. All right. Any questions?
I just saw some people keep mentioning that TI depends on your market and the square foot as well. Landlord gives out more incentives. They really want the property to be leased up. We actually got a lot of TI for my family. We're doing a restaurant right now in Austin. They basically had one building left, one unit left that was like unrented, and they just really wanted to fill this up because we were like peak COVID at the time. And
right.
So we didn't get the most cheapest rent, but they gave us a massive TI in comparison. Normally it's 35 a square foot. They went up to like 45 a square foot for us, which we thought, we got another 30% more. It's like, good job negotiating.
yeah. And as Nelson mentioned before, almost everything in the lease is negotiable. So you can give some here, you can take some elsewhere, right? It's all in the name of the game. So thank you for that example. You're better explaining that part than I am when it comes to tenant allowances. So, all right here. So commercial rehab and rework. This is the kind of stuff I actually deal with on a daily basis. My primary work is general contracting. Investing just happens to be a kind of a side job for me. But common pitfalls. I want to emphasize a lot of this stuff. There are some overlaps between multifamily and retail and offices when it comes to this. I know there's going to be some people in the audience that are going to be like, well, I don't ever want to pick up a hammer in my life, so why would I ever want to know this, right? But there are serious repercussions if you don't really know, if you don't know what you're doing, or your tenants, contractors don't know what they're doing here. Now, the first one you see right here is accessibility. Now, anyone in California who deals with retail or office knows how much of a pain accessibility is, because since there is no governing body for ensuring that that places are accessible for the handicapped or those in wheelchairs, there are typically serial lawyers that go around, especially in California. They will just take a boilerplate lawsuit, like clauses and templates, and they'll just try and hit as many landlords as possible. They say my client so and so felt ostracized because he couldn't open the door. And they'll actually cite the number of times you do it, and pretty much they know that they will win, so they will oftentimes settle, and it will oftentimes end in like a 5-figure settlement, oftentimes, and you can get hit with these multiple times until you actually fix the issue. I know some other states it's not as bad as California, but I really wanted to bring this up because it's very important, and this is exactly why it dictates why commercial bathrooms have to be a certain size, why handles have to be a certain design, why parking has to be a certain width, and it also defines your van accessibility, your van unloading space as well.
But fun fact, so if you are adept at building and working with the cities in California, it's like easy mode once you start investing out of state. We're building this restaurant, and and some we moved it through the city, and for a second we were worried, like the landlord was telling us, oh, the city's pretty strict here, so you got to watch out. And it's like we passed with flying colors, like we didn't miss a single thing. And part of that is just like our experience working in California. It's like we just add extra stuff just in case, and that covers almost everything that we would miss in another city.
But you'd be surprised. I think, but this is specifically related to ADA and accessibility. It's just this is a real big pain point, especially for anyone in California. So just be on the lookout for this. There are consultants that will work through and design things that will make sure that you won't be tripped up by one of these 5-figure fines. Now another one here, equipment. I bring up equipment because oftentimes a business is a changing environment. Things change all the time in a business. And what I've noticed a lot with equipment is that people typically size it just right, or maybe they undersize it or size it just right. So for example, we have a bakery tenant, they had a hood, but then now they wanted to put one more piece of equipment underneath. But because of that, then the hood was too short. So what happened is that they pretty much had to rip out the entire, hood and put in a new one. And that cost them 30 to 40 grand just to do that kind of stuff. Or it could even be more, depending on how much. I've seen, things, it depends on the type of hood you get and how fancy it gets. This one was simply just a type 2 hood, so it wasn't too bad. But they threw 30 grand down the drain because they simply just didn't oversize it a little bit. And this same thing applies for your electrical work, your plumbing work. It really pays as a landlord just to oversize things a little bit, so you don't have to end up with dealing with all these little issues. Obviously, the tenant, you can also put the onus on the tenant to do it, but I do not trust the tenant's contractor to do a good job, which is why I typically just say oversize everything. It pays off in the end. And the final one is what we call fire safety. This one is fairly, there's a lot of overlap with multifamily on this one. The big one that you'll notice is that your drywall is, there's things, right? Your fire extinguishers, your fire sprinklers, and then the thickness of your drywall. Like all these things are dictated, but because just due to fire as well. So if you go into certain buildings, you'll notice that certain capacities in California will just read maximum capacity 49, and there is a reason, because it's the fire sprinkler. Because once you hit that 50 capacity mark, you trigger the requirement for a fire sprinkler, and the fire sprinkler will cost maybe 150, 200 grand easily for this kind of stuff. So that's why you'll notice on capacities they'll read 49, and so 49 is a magic number. As well, and things as well, you'd be surprised how many people hire contractors that are so used to residential and they use 1/2-inch drywall, and then once they try and install it, they get shot in the foot because it's too thin. Commercial, it's all 5/8. People don't think, oh, 1/8 of an inch doesn't matter, but I guess for drywall it does.
Peter, you also mentioned here in Vegas, if the space doesn't have an existing grease trap, it'll be a hefty one-time discharge fee, around $3,000 to $5,000. So that's a fun fact.
That is a great one to throw in as well. Yeah, that's all under equipment. People just need to learn how to, it's better just to oversize, honestly. That's just from my experience. This is also a great lesson for anyone that is a restaurant tenant. If you're trying to install things, just you kind of go along the lines, just supersize it. All right. Thank you for, by the way, Peter, thank you for that extra context. That's good. All right. So right here, this is kind of like my example part. I picked out a single tenant example. These are nationally recognized brands here. So I've listed right here on a row here, showing the cap rates for selected nationally recognized tenants. Now, what you'll see here is I've defined the cap rate. That's just your NOI over your purchase price here. So pretty much what I'm going to go through is I'm going to go through these brands here. I'm going to tell you like the pros and cons and things that you should be watching out for. So a lot of these tenants are what they're fairly maintenance and headache free because the tenant handles most of it. And a lot of these are fairly high credit as well. So this ends up being one of the safer classes when it comes to commercial retail. Now, over here on the far left, you'll see that that's McDonald's. McDonald's gives you a 3.9% cap rate because, quite honestly, like investing in McDonald's is almost like investing in the U.S. government. It's super safe. You know, it's not going to go out of business, and you know that, and you're going to pay that premium for the peace of mind knowing that it's a corporate guarantee. You know that they're going to be there, right? Now, as you go further along, right, you're going to get a little bit to the right. You're going to get a little bit riskier here. So what you'll see here is the next one, 4.6% cap rate. This is going to be your 7-Elevens and your Aldi's. These ones are great too, but as a word of caution, you know, they're a little bit lower on the end of the cap rate, but they also, in general, they're also privately held. So that's just an extra risk factor that you would have to take into account. And even for those like your 7-Elevens and your Jiffy Lubes on the right there's going to be a potential contamination. If you have a gas station or spilling a lot of oil products, that will potentially wreck you in the future, right? When you're trying to remediate the soil or clean it up, right? That's hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra cost. Now, the next one over here, we got KFC here. Now, KFC is part of the Yum brand, but they are not corporate guaranteed, which means that's why they trade at a 5.5 versus say a 4.5. If they were corporate guaranteed, they would trade at a much lower cap rate, but they are not. So because they're all franchise run. So for example, for your KFCs, you have to be very selective when it comes to your operators. You need to know who your operator is and how many they run. Because for example, I'm going to say right now, you know, a franchisee that runs 5 KFCs, he's considered small peanuts. That's a small operator, right? There are literally corporations that will run hundreds and hundreds of KFC units. And those are like the prime ones that, you know, because they're bigger, they have more credibility. Those are the ones you kind of want to hunt for, right? Obviously and that will be reflected in your cap rate. Next one, you got your DaVita. That's your dialysis center. I'm not too familiar with DaVita, but I know it has something to do with the kidneys. So that's about it. But
I'm decently familiar. Basically, these things last forever because people have to come by once a week to get their kidneys cleaned out through dialysis machines. And so, you know, they're never going to leave. And then they have a semi-monopoly on the space because they cleared out a lot of competitors a few years ago. And so now, you know, they kind of have a dominant hold on a product that people have to use every week to survive, which is why they have like a really strong, you know, rate. The only thing going against DaVita is that people are starting to turn their head and be like, I don't know if this is good. Like,
yeah, I mean, have you seen legislations and propositions in California trying to, you know, inch little things into the business, you know, to change things? And as well, another thing to think about for DaVita and as well for Jiffy Lube is that these buildings, if they decide to vacate, because the tenant also has some negotiating power as well. They can choose not to exercise their option. If they choose not to do so, then they can leave, and you're stuck with quite honestly, for DaVita, you're stuck with a building that it's hard to lease out. And these are risks that you're going to be seeing with all these, right? You know, the tenant has some negotiating power as well when it comes to this. Jiffy Lube, same thing. You know, it's an industry that may be on the downward trend because as electric cars become more and more prevalent, you're going to be seeing there's going to be less needs for Jiffy Lube. Dollar Tree is interesting because it's actually considered one of the faster growing companies, but there's a couple downsides to it. One is that it's not triple net actually, so you actually have to maintain the roof. You actually are financially responsible for the roof on these, and as well, I think these are also ground leases, so you won't be able to depreciate it. And finally, because Dollar Trees are usually located in the middle of quite honestly middle of nowhere, right? You are kind of at the mercy of this tenant, because if this tenant leaves, what are you going to fill it up with? There's quite honestly nothing you can fill it up with, because it's just a building on the side of a, you know, suburban road or a country road. You don't really have much leverage against the Dollar Tree. And the same thing for Rite Aid, because Rite Aid on the far right, that's the highest cap rate, just because, at least in this example, it's going to be the highest cap rate because it is the weakest out of the 3 pharmacies. And when you think about it, right, when you go to a pharmacy, I last went there for, a COVID shot. I didn't go there to buy milk or beer or fragrances. There's a lot of extra space in there, and it's a huge question mark, right? If Rite Aid goes out of business, or Rite Aid decides to move out, what are you going to fill it up with, right? And these are all risks that are all in play, and it's reflected in the cap rate.
I actually know a family that's selling off like 100-something Jiffy Lubes that they operate and own. It does seem like people are moving out of that space. So the other thing you also have to worry about now is like what sort of legislation and trends are happening that your tenant might go out of business like entirely, right? If you're depending on that tenant as your main, storefront tenant to like keep you guys afloat and bring other smaller retailers, because it's very common what they'll do is they'll bring in like a big grocery store like Aldi, and then a bunch of other smaller retail stores will decide to move in because there's
you got your anchor tenant, which is Aldi in this case. Yes.
Yeah. If that tenant goes out of business, well, then you're kind of stuck. It's a little rough to get around that. However, like you said, I have some comments we were going to list off. And Lee mentioned medical offices like the Vita also command higher rents than general retail and office. Probably, they have to have more specialized equipment, right? So you can usually charge more for it. Let's see, Annie Lou. Rite Aids and Walgreens keep opening and closing all the time. They're also usually in like weird corner spots that are hard to replace as a result. Like I always feel like I look at that and like you could put maybe like a fire station there, but it's hard.
It's $1 billion question. If you're able to fill in a vacant Rite Aid or Walgreens, whatever, if you knew the secret sauce of that, you'd buy up all the Walgreens and Rite Aids, and if they went bankrupt, or moved out of the place, you'd be able to fill it out instantly, right? It's a $1 billion question, and quite honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I don't think a lot of people do either.
Yeah. Let's see. Arthur mentioned, isn't Rite Aid going through a bankruptcy? They are finding tenants to assume their leases right now, which is just as hard, trying to sublease out space that they can't really do much with.
Yeah, and that's reflected as a risk, right? And that's why their cap rate is so high.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then last question. Also, a lot of retail business has just been overbuilt, and someone mentioned that now there's a lot of online pharmacies, and online. There's going to be online groceries. I saw a CBRE report saying grocery ordering is on the uptrend, so watch out, anchor tenants that are dependent on a grocery train. Y'all could be at risk at some point. And then.
I feel like this talk is discouraging people from investing in commercial retail.
Well, the counterpoint to that is they make a bunch of money if you have a small retail strip that has all services and restaurants. So if you have like a retail business that is like laundromats and restaurants and dry cleaning, like people are going to keep going to those all the time, right? So at least those tenants will stay in place, and then you'll get some crazy 20-30% cash on cash as a result of, and you'll pay yourself off in like 2-3 years by putting in the right tenant.
That's correct. But at the same time, we thought about this years ago. We're like, hey, Amazon's coming along. Well, let's make it Amazon proof. So we stopped. We have our places filled with with restaurants, with barbershops, things that you can't replace with Amazon. But then 2020 rolled around, Alameda County shut down everything, and these guys have been struggling. These guys weren't even allowed to open up their doors by the county. So it's obviously that strategy kind of bit us. But it's a play. I understand where it comes from, but I'm just giving you a con on the other side.
Yeah. CBRE also mentioned that there's going to be a return to actually in-store purchases. Online penetration is actually down for the first time in years, where we went from ordering a lot online, maybe just COVID opening them back again, but we went back towards more brick and store purchases in the last like 2 or 3 quarters. So it could be a return to retail. Maybe all the bad retail has been wiped out in the last decade, And there's been a lot of retail that's been wiped out in the last decade. So
yeah, I've seen reports where like, you know, these direct to consumer brands are simply just moving into retail, and they're opening up brick and mortar locations. So maybe there's just a trend going in the other way. Right now, you've got your Allbirds, you've got your I don't even know, whatever, Bonobos, whatever. All these D2C online retailers are now moving into brick and mortar. So I guess people just haven't learned their lessons.
Yep. Let's see. Kim Aristizabal mentioned Bezos is moving into pharma. He's director of drugstore.com and backed by Amazon. I know Amazon was doing a drug ordering prescription business as well. So is actually Mark Cuban. He has a Cost Plus is his website, and all they do is tack on 15% to the cost to manufacture drugs. And so they're saving a bunch of money that way too. Let's see.
Yeah, well, I mean, I realize this whole chat's turning into poop on Rite Aid and Walgreens and CVS, but I mean, it's a legitimate question, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Muying mentioned Amazon Fresh is life changing. I agree. For a lot of people right now, you have to consider how much time does it take you to go grocery shopping, right? For me, I know I spend like an hour, 2 hours usually because I like picking out my fruit and whatnot. I enjoy the process of picking out my ingredients and then cooking them. However, an hour of my time is worth more than the $5 service charge now that it would take for me to, you know, shop, but then another hour getting there and back. So it's like 2 hours of your time worth the $5 it would cost to pick out groceries. If not, honestly, it's so much time savings just clicking a button, and then they do it on repeat, right? So they like repeat orders and they just add to your cart. So like every 2 weeks, I just click a button and then food comes to my front door and I didn't have to leave my house for it. And so that's an hour or 2 hours that I get back each week just because, you know, Amazon Fresh is a thing now. And it's like, if I did Amazon Fresh, it's free. If it's Whole Foods, they add like a $10 surcharge, right? But like that is so minuscule compared to like, if you're feeding a family of 3, that's like $400 a month, right? You're shopping for longer than an hour. So if you want to save the time going back there and forth, like a lot of people are moving to grocery shopping online for that main reason. I know it save me time, you know, and I eat healthier.
But as a counterpoint though, you know, I think for us, we're on the younger side, right? We're the ones who will do something like grocery delivery and all these things, but there's plenty of holdouts who actually want to physically be there. For example, like in the Bay Area, for a lot of us in our age range or whatever, we look at Denny's, we're kind of like, oh, what the hell? Why would I ever go to a Denny's? You know, but there are plenty of people who love going to Denny's every single day. And it's one of the, you know, I mean, as someone, I think someone else in the group pointed out earlier, you know, it's one of the better performing restaurants in California. So just keep that in mind. We don't want to be listening to an echo chamber of us just saying, oh, you know, online grocery is the way of the future.
Yeah. Anthony Wang mentioned COVID was tough, but his tenants are back to normal. Everything is picked back up for him. He's in Texas. And then Annie mentioned CVS is doing well because it's partnering with insurance companies for the benefits. The insurance companies give the patients several extra $100 just to spend their money at CVS specifically. Let's see. Yeah.
Well, I don't really have much more besides this one. I think I've only got one slide after. Yep. So just as a recap, we'll just recap whatever we talked about, and then we can just keep firing through the questions here. So just some of the final notes that you'll just hopefully you remember this from our conversation today. First one, higher risk, higher reward. You know, you're going to get more cash on cash returns, but but you're also going to have to stomach, you know, longer vacancy rates. You're going to be able to stomach, you know, like additional lawyer fees and as well, just because tenants are a little bit more sophisticated than your residential on average. So for a lot of these, like, you know, these more well-established tenants will actually have like their own represented agent as well. So you're going to have to pay for their commission as well. These are all just associated costs. And that's what it is. You know, and in general, just because of the higher barrier to entry, there's just less players in the field. Hopefully one day we would, you know, hopefully this talk will inspire one or two of you in the audience to actually kind of go into the field and say, hey, you know, dabble in it and, you know, make some money out of it. Okay. And finally, just be careful. Honestly, the lease dictates everything. The lease will dictate. It'll increase or it'll decrease your property by millions of dollars. If you sign the right one or you sign the wrong one, it'll simply just, it'll make or break the valuation of your property there. And so that's why I highly recommend, as you know, especially as a beginner, you should probably go with a real estate lawyer. I'm not paid by any lawyers, but I'm dead serious though. You want to go with a lawyer just because they understand, you know, the clauses. They can pick out all these little nitty gritty details that you may not. You know, I read leases all the time, and you know, even my family, after so many years, we still have our own lawyer just to pick through, right? Because it's better to have multiple sets of eyes, because in the end, you don't want to be, you know, you don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish, right? You might be saving a couple of bucks now, or $1,000 or so, you know, saving on the lawyer, but you might get screwed out of millions in the end if you don't watch out. So that's pretty much a quick rundown of how commercial retail works. So yeah, I'll open up to any questions on the field.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna jazz hands. I don't know if do we clap or jazz hands?
It's okay. You don't have to unmute in order to clap. It's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So let me see if there's any more questions. Okay. What does Chick-fil-A cap rate look like right now?
Great question. You can go onto this website and you can find out. I'm going to guarantee it's probably around the 4 range, the 3.5, 4.5 range. At least that's what I've seen. I don't know if this website has it, but I'm willing to bet that, because it's one of those strong growing brands, it's going to be 3.5, 4.5. But I'm not familiar. They might be a ground lease. I'm not sure. Maybe not. So, but because remember that, right? If it's a ground lease, that means you can't depreciate on the building itself. You can't depreciate on the improvements. So that's less, it's less tax advantageous, and it will reflect on some of these tenants.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, the Chick-fil-A, I thought they were all corporate backed, so I would make them stronger, but yeah.
They could be, yeah. I think they are all corporate backed, actually. I think they're all corporate backed. I don't know the answer to this question, so I'll defer on this one.
Okay, Jason Shaw mentioned TI could be 0 if possible, but in LA, it's usually around $20 to $40 per square foot if you have to provide a tenant improvement.
Okay, thank you. That's good reference.
Yeah, Anthony Wang mentioned anyone looking for retail. I think he's trying to sell some retail. So if you guys want to find stuff in Texas that's retail, contact him.
Who is? I think it's a reference to you, not to me. With your contacts, 100 Jiffy Lubes.
he's already in the process of selling them all, so it's a little too late for that.
Is he the owner of the business or the owner of the properties that own that has the
he owns some of the properties, and then but he's like the operator for the Jiffy Lubes. Jason Shaw mentioned also Chick-fil-A actually pay more for a ground lease instead of the existing pad because they want to have their optimized design with the drive-through. Actually, yeah, he has a point. Most of the Chick-fil-A's that I've been to and seen, they have like a specific way they set up their drive-through to like move clients in faster. They still have the line, which is the crazy thing to me. It's like they have 2 like optimized lines to get people in and out as quickly as possible, but it still backs out to like, you know, the street sometimes.
Yeah, so. I think they waste too much time saying "my pleasure" every time you place an order with them. It's probably, operational efficiency. They just need to cut that out. No, just kidding. But that's good to know.
David L mentioned that it's around a 3 cap in California for Chick-fil-A at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that is reflected as well. I forgot to mention this as well, right? Your cap rates in California are going to be lower, but that's also because there's more intrinsic land value associated with these franchises or whatever in the Bay Area or in LA, right? Meanwhile, like a Dollar Tree, let's just say I'm just going to pick on Dollar Tree for a second, right? A Dollar Tree in an urban area is going to be a higher cap rate than a Dollar Tree in Mississippi or something like that, out in the countryside, right? Because there is intrinsic land value associated with it, right? So if Dollar Tree decides to play hardball and moves out, you can at least try and fill it in with something else. So that's, so as you know, someone mentioned earlier, the 3% cap rate for California does make sense.
Gotcha. Well, thanks again for your time, Vincent. Grateful that you could come by and explain your family business to us. Those of you in Mastermind, stay behind. We're going over underwriting on some of the off-market stuff that I found. But otherwise, how do we reach out to you, Vincent? When this is said and done, how do people contact you?
Just add me on Facebook. I'm not selling anything, so it's okay. I don't have any ebooks to sell. I don't have any courses to sell.
What about your private $5,000 a month mastermind?
Yeah, well, that's under wraps, but no, not at this time. I don't have anything like that.
Well,
I have nothing to sell.
If you guys are thirsty, you can reach him at the Alameda Brewery. That's
Alameda
one place
Island.
you can find Island Brewery. But otherwise, thanks again for your time.
Of course. Thank you, everyone.
Stop recording.